Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everybody. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for the 48th Annual Stroum Lectures at the University of Washington. That's worth applauding. My name is Danny Hoffman. I'm the interim director of the Jackson School of International Studies. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge, as we do with all of our public events, that we're on Coast Salish territory, the traditional homelands of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and other indigenous peoples. The Jackson School understands that the international community includes sovereign American Indian tribes, First Nations, and indigenous peoples across the world. Now, as I'm sure you all know, the Stroum Center for Jewish Studies is a very special place. The center is unique among American Jewish Studies programs in being located in a school of international studies. It's a scholarly home that makes sense for us and for the kind of impacts we hope to have in research, teaching, and community engagement. It's a relationship that encourages all of us to see everything we do in relation to both local and global engagements, as you will see, no doubt, in tonight's events. Now, that's a tradition of public scholarship that predates the Stroum Center itself. Before there was a center, there were the Stroum Lectures. Over 45 years ago, Murray Schiff, then president of the Jewish Federation, believed that the University of Washington should bring a luminary in the field of Jewish studies here to Seattle for a series of talks for the benefit of the entire on-campus and off-campus community. Sam and Althea Stroum, whose passion for learning and academic advancement was a perfect fit for this project, seeded a program that has grown to become one of the oldest and most prestigious lectureships in the field of Jewish studies. Now, our speaker today, Anthony Mordechai Tzvi Russell, joins such scholars as Paula Hyman, the renowned historian of Jewish women, Aaron Rodrigue, a pioneer in the field of the history of Sephardic Jews in Turkey, and Yosef Yerushalmi, author of Zohar, Jewish History and Jewish Memory. Now, I am pleased to say you now have the opportunity to watch many of the Stroum lectures from the past several decades on our website, jewishstudies.washington.edu. Are we getting some weird feedback? Is that okay? Is that me? Okay, gotcha. Well, I tell you what, maybe I will, first of all, just say thank you for being here. We're very excited for tonight's program, and I will, I'll turn it over, at that point then I will turn it over to welcome Dr. Mika Ahuvia, the director of the Stroum Center. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. My name is Mika Ahuvia, and I am the Herbert and Lucy Pruzan Chair in Jewish Studies and the Director of the Stroum Center for Jewish Studies. So on behalf of all of us here at the Stroum Center, it is my pleasure to welcome you and thank you all for coming and finding parking in a prompt way. Thank you. So many of you here with us tonight have also been instrumental partners in the successes of the Stroum Center, dating back to its origin almost 50 years ago. So thank you for your support and your ongoing commitment. And thank you to those of you who donated when registering for this event. We want to make thoughtful and educational programming free and accessible to all, and your donations help to make that a reality. I also want to thank my amazing staff who make all events possible and look easy. My deepest gratitude to Dr. Sarah Zaydis-Rosen, Dr. Brendan Goldman, Grace Elizabeth D., Laura Van Sessen, Kara Schoonmaker, and Liv Fowler. We would also like to thank our co-sponsors, the Department of German Studies, the School of Music, and the History Department. The last 49 years have been quite an evolution for the Stroum Center, beginning with our lecture series, becoming a program, and now we're a center with 5 full-time faculty members and 30 affiliate faculty members from all over the university. We also have 2 sub-programs and a professional staff that makes all of our intellectual resources available to the public. I'm very grateful to my colleagues in the Stroum Center and the Stroum Lecture Committee for their support in electing Anthony Mordechai Tzvi Russell for the 48th Annual Stroum Lecture. Now, one of the key colleagues that made that possible is Sasha Senderovich, who will be our moderator tonight. Professor Senderovich, whose promotion to tenure was approved today, by the way. Congratulations. Thank you. Professor Senderovich is the author of How the Soviet Jew Was Made, published by Harvard University Press in 2022, and translator with Harriet Morav of David Bergelson's Yiddish novel Judgment, which was published by Northwestern University Press in 2017. In addition to his academic work, Sasha has published journalism and public scholarship in the Los Angeles Review of Books, Lilith, the New York Times, The New Republic, Jewish Currents, and Seattle's The Stranger. One of his additional regular activities involves summertime teaching as a faculty member of the Great Jewish Book Program for high school students at the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Massachusetts. Please join me in welcoming Sasha Senderovich.
Thank you, Mika, for the introduction. And in addition to thanking all the people who had already been thanked, I wanted to also briefly thank a few more. It took a team effort, as Mika had mentioned, to make an argument that once in a while the annual Stroum lecture should be delivered by an artist. So I thank my colleagues Barbara Henry and Annegret Ohm, who were instrumental in this effort, and we are the troika of people whose interests include Yiddish. So we are very happy that today is happening. And I also wanted to thank a couple of folks who are local. Some of you are here perhaps because Stephanie Brender of Seattle's klezmer brass band Shpilkis has kindly helped me advertise this event at the Rokas Purim Spiel, where Shpilkis was performing a couple of months ago. Others of you might be here because you rightly took the advice to attend from Maya Brown of Seattle's anti-fascist folk punk klezmer trio Brivele, and of many other Seattle things and places. And I also wanted to thank Ellen Nestingen, a student at Garfield High, who is here with her grandmother and also some other friends from Garfield High School. So it's really great to also have some high school students with us. And also, of course, for all of the UW students who are here, I recognize some of my students. Welcome all. And some of you are here because you may be Stroum lecture stalwarts. This is, after all, a Seattle institution. Others may be here for the first time. Thanks in part to the efforts of the people I just mentioned, efforts that remind us that we have many communities in this town whose interests, divergent though they often are, often and sometimes bring us into the same room. So let me introduce the event and the speaker and the musicians. In Train, one of the tracks on his stunning album Convergence, which I've been regularly including in the syllabus for my course on Jewish American literature and culture since it first came out a few years ago, Anthony Russell brings together a Yiddish song by Eliakim Zunzer, a native of Vilna, who died in America in 1913, and When the Train Comes Along, a Black American spiritual. An Eisenbahn Anaya ist die Zeit geworden, welche führt Passagieren sei arm, sei reich. A railroad train, a new one, has become the time which carries passengers both poor and rich. Läuft sen dem Wunder, nur als das Besikoren, weil das is a moshel an kegen eich. Run and see this wonder, but all of this is in your mind, because this is a parable regarding you. So travel by train, usually third class, has become somewhat of a commonplace about the life of Ashkenazi Jews in the Russian Empire, captured most famously by the Yiddish short story writer Sholem Aleichem. But it's the words of the Yiddish song that address the audience in the second person, and this people who are being addressed are us, are the passengers on the allegorical train, with God as its director. Gott, der Direktor von Bahn, deciding when our ticket might have expired, when our billet is ois, and when it's time for us to get off, even when we ourselves might not think that it is. The words of the African-American spiritual interwoven in Anthony's composition through the Yiddish lyrics as a refrain echo this last point. When the train comes along, Lord, gonna meet you at the station when the train comes along. So one thinks of actual trains as a dominant mode of transit from the American South northward during the Great Migration, and also allegorical trains of the Underground Railroad before then, which the novelist Colson Whitehead has breathlessly depicted as real in his novel a few years ago. So the two the two musical, linguistic, cultural, historical, imaginative traditions converge in ways that might or would never have noticed had we not been blessed with the act of the artist's mind that observed this convergence in the first place and allowed us to glimpse it through his performance. In his thinking, writing, and singing, Anthony Russell takes his audience seriously and asks a lot in return. Most of all, to allow our minds to open and follow him on his journey through thought, words, and music, which, idiosyncratic though it may be, in which artistic journey isn't, or at least which journey that is worth the audience's time isn't, can lead us to new insights about our own place on the train, the Eisenbahn of time and life, no matter what kind of ticket got us on it. So it is really a delight and a pleasure to welcome Anthony Mordechai Tzvi Russell to our stage tonight. Anthony is a performer, composer, and arranger specializing in music in the Yiddish language. His record Convergence, 2018, is a collaboration with klezmer consort Dvoretsky Pass, and it explores the sounds and themes of 100 years of African-American and Ashkenazi Jewish music. Inspired by an ethnographic trip to Belarus and Poland, as a Wallace Annenberg Helix Fellow, Anthony formed a duo, Tzvi Brider, or two brothers, with the accordionist and pianist Dmitri Gaskin for the creation of a new set of modernist Yiddish poetry, for the creation of new music set to modernist Yiddish poetry of the 20th century. And their new album, Cosmopolitans, recently released on the Borscht label, is fabulous. So, Borscht Beat label. Yes, all right. I've subverted your pun. Sorry about that. A Hadar Rising Song Fellow in 2021-2022. Anthony is also an essayist on music and culture in a number of publications, including Jewish Currents and Moment. Anthony lives in Atlanta, Georgia, with his husband, Rabbi Michael Rothbaum. And Dmitri Gaskin, who is here with Anthony today, is an accordionist, pianist, composer, and arranger specializing in klezmer and Polish folk music. With his duo with Anthony Russell, Tzvi Brider, he performs original art songs in Yiddish. He also performs in the Bay Area klezmer trio Beimele. In collaboration with these two groups, Dmitri arranged on the Borscht Beat label the record Cosmopolitan. In 2022, he served as a music director for the San Francisco Playhouse's production of Indecent, for which he won the Best Music Direction Award from San Francisco Bay Area Theater Critics Circle. Outside of klezmer music, Dmitri is a recipient of Morton Gould Young Composer Award from the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers for his work in contemporary classical music. Dmitri studied accordion with Josh Horowitz and Alan Byrne. He lives in California with his wife, their 3 accordions, and 4 goats. So tonight, drawing on the melodeclamation, a 19th century performance genre combining oration and art music, Anthony Russell, accompanied by Dmitri Gaskin, will investigate disparate elements: Black religiosity, the music of Chopin, queerness, the ambiguities of diaspora, through the mediums of Jewishness and sound in their performance, titled Signs and Wonders, a Melodeklamatsiye. The performance will be followed by a short conversation that will be moderated by me, in which will also include audience questions. Please feel free to send the questions for the question and answer period at any time during the talk. To send in a question, use your phone and visit slido.com/Stroum. So slido.com/Stroum, where you can type in your question. And you could do it anytime during the talk. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dmitri Gaskin and Anthony Russell.
A man of a certain age told me something I created consisted too much of complaint. He warned that an audience with the expectation of entertainment would not abide it for very long. Unfortunately, my words were never for him in the first place, or the nebulous audience he summoned for the purpose of dismissing me. No, my words were the piquant complaint of generations, some 400 years, after which God took notice, responding with a mighty hand, an outstretched arm, great terror, signs, and wonders. In terms of inspiration, the phenomenon of America presents itself to me not only as a place of encounters, but also as a place of possibilities. A number of provocative questions with vibrantly illustrated, unforeseeable answers. For me, one of the most interesting questions is what happens when one diaspora, that of Africa, meets the considerable mileage of another, that being, of course, the Jewish one. The thirst for exit shifts in our blood, if blood is the medium of intergenerational desire. For a redemption that will take us away, or at very least back. This thirst has involved stubborn geographic specificities, hinter homelands wavering like a mirage in a space between distance and fantasy. In an African-American folktale, the enslaved steal themselves away through the air by uttering strange, scarcely remembered words from their storied place of origin. Elsewhere, Jews, under the thrall of false messiahs, waited to elope with a vast cloud that would convey them directly from Poland to the land of Israel. Our homelands relied on these enchantments to call us back to them, instinctually bending towards us, waiting like a maternal breast. But blood eventually tires of longing. The age of enchantments is over. I cannot hear the call of homelands over the mundane din of their present-day inhabitants, bemused and shrugging. They can just as easily take me or leave me. Now, every bus that arrives on time is a messiah to me, careening around the corner before making a full stop, waiting for me to board, its itinerary invariably elsewhere. There's a famous Jewish question in Psalms. How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? This question has almost never been rhetorical. It has always been answered 1,000 times, in 1,000 different tongues, in 1,000 different lands. And the answer to that question, how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? A question which to me is the very beginning of modernity. How do we inhabit a conceptual space? The answer to that question has always been one of creativity. The one who has answered that question has, in some ways, always been an artist working through the medium of diaspora. The hanging up of a harp in the branches of a tree beside the waters of Babylon was not the cessation of music, but a transfiguration, a music of another kind, a visual music, a metaphorical music. And it is the responsibility of the Jewish artist to figure out what that music sounds like. What does that music sound like? The sound of a world within worlds. Hameven Yavim. If you know, you know. The fertile melodic soil out of which art and culture has grown, of unparalleled richness, influence, and dynamism, arguably the bedrock of American culture, crafted from the stone that numerous builders refused, derived from at least a couple of different kinds of ghettos, sprung onto a world that originally shoved it into those dark and narrow places. Something between a shimmy and a shofar, between riffing on a groove and cantorial largesse. And it happened here, not because of a pack of land and people-owning men in white wigs and wooden teeth, but miraculously, in spite of them. Its contents are foreign and familiar, collaborative and appropriative, footsore and fancy-free. Over the past 10 years, it is from this place that I have expressed myself, performing as an advocate for the inclusion of Yiddish, language and culture as a relevant facet of contemporary life and expression. Yiddish, he said. I will never forget how it sounded. Like I had mentioned something I had found rooting through the trash of their mind, the trash of their history. Even though they had thrown it away, it was their trash, and they wanted to know what I was doing rooting through their trash. It wasn't even trash day. Trash day was on a Tuesday, and here I was rooting through their trash on a Saturday. Yiddish, he said. Why would you want to mess around with that? Pulling a face like someone made a rude noise or a rude smell. They waited for an answer or gave the appearance of waiting, though it looked like they had already made up their mind. The answer would be something funny or quaint, something impractical or ridiculous, suitably humorous for the purposes of small talk. And there was a look in their eye which said, one man's trash is another man's treasure, but this person hasn't been among us long enough to know how useless this trash is. Listen, Hebrew-speaking children on kibbutzim and Eretz Yisrael built forts out of trash and useless things, and then they became adults, and then they built a nation, and then they built our future. What are you going to build with Yiddish? A place no one ever wants to return to except in a musical? Good luck with that, Hamudi. I had nothing to say in response. What should I have said? It was true that I hadn't been a Jew for very long, that I had no country to show for my efforts. And I looked down at my hands, the smutty fingertips and the nails which had begun to get Yiddish underneath them. And I sighed and I said, I'm a boy, I'm a boy, my boy, I'm a boy, boy, my boy, I'm a boy, I'm a boy, I'm a boy, 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 I'm a boy, I'm a boy, 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 I'm a boy. I'm a boy, I'm a boy, boy, boy. I'm a boy, I'm a boy, 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 I'm boy. I'm a boy, I'm a boy, boy, boy. I'm a boy, boy. There's a particular genre of music in Yiddish that doesn't have much of a reputation of having anything to do with modern life. Yiddish Kunstlieder, Yiddish art song, a genre of concertized music composed to be performed from the stage. My Kummosch melonder Regen, wo sie los der mir zu hen, sein Hand rollend auf die Scheiben, geukeln sich wie trübe Tränen. I think I was attracted to this music because it represented to me a direct parallel to the concertized African American spiritual, a genre I was very familiar with through the artistry of Paul Robeson, Marian Anderson, Leontine Price, and countless other black performers of our national cultural heritage. just a poor wayfaring stranger, a traveling through this world of war. But there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go. How can I begin to convey to you the resonance of a phrase like, my rock, in whom there is no flaw, when those euphonious Jewish words fall upon the black heart and mind of a religious bent? They are held there as surely as light is stored for the righteous. When black religious utterance falls over Jewish ears, it is often more theologically difficult, running, as it often does, directly into the arms of an attendant Messiah. Go Down Moses makes its inroads honestly to the Jewish ear and heart, narratively vacating Egypt as a free people instead of vacating a tomb as the would-be son of God. Familiar to me is my own hand. The vividness of black religious expression is alarming and provocative when placed beside the normative tenets of the Jewish religion. Its meaning to me, as a Jew, is intensely personal and possibly nuanced, eccentric, idiosyncratic. To clarify, the meaning of these texts to me as a Jew, to me, and not necessarily to you, to paraphrase the Haggadah. Let me leaven the questions of the Seder. Isn't it queer that some Jews use black religious expression in the privacy of their domestic rituals to tell their own story? Do they sit and recline in the strangeness at the Seder table, silently observed by an untouched prophet's cup? Why, for years, was, "Are you Jewish?" and "How are you Jewish?" frequently my first interactions with American Jews. If I walk into a community Seder, the walls ringing with Go Down Moses, might I ask, "Are you black? How are you black?" In my heart, black religious expression bears the imminent, unutterable names and acts of the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac, and the mysterious night grappler of Jacob. As a respectful Jew, I cannot simply throw these texts away. I place them, along with their occasional messianic heresies, carefully in the geniza of my soul. In the spiritual and the Yiddish art song, the direct pathos of the ethnic experience is raised into the ether of Western art music, a genre of culture that historically has almost never asked for contributions from blacks or Jews in the first place. A familiarity with the immortals of the Western canon comes with a stale peril for the minority consumer. The inevitable hatreds lurking in the decomposing hearts of past luminaries. Loving, identifying, or projecting yourself onto the work of creators who profess hostility for your kind is a treacherous intimacy. Your unimagined, unwanted embraces mingling with prejudices from beyond the grave. Chopin declares in private correspondence that, quote, Jews will be Jews, and Huns will be Huns. That's the truth of it. He goes on to say, but what can one do? I'm forced to deal with them. Here, Chopin anticipates my relationship with his words. Disappointed, I try to assess which anti-Semite lurks beneath Chopin's music, the particular or the general. That is, was he only as anti-Semitic as any one of his contemporary countrymen? Or was his anti-Semitism all his own, inventive, high-strung, melancholic, tubercular? I want to ignore these possibilities. Chopin's correspondence anticipates this too. Quote, every difficulty slurred over will be a ghost to disturb your rest later on. I prefer to resist strategies of subversion, a too ready and somewhat tired tool, but my particular regard for Chopin's music is undeniably subversive. I consume and project myself into his work in ways that violate hierarchies of responsible classical music listenership. Oscar Wilde plainly leads the charge, admitting that after playing Chopin's music, he feels, quote, as if I had been weeping over sins that I had never committed and mourning over tragedies that were never my own. Wilde neatly condenses the liturgical nature of my own listening to Chopin. If I emoted as completely through my actual prayers as I did listening to Chopin, weeping over my sins, mourning over tragedies both inherited and appropriated, I wouldn't have to consign the possibility of being a better Jew to some indefinite period in the future. In my ear, his music becomes an oddly creolized thing, in conversation with people and places with whom he had no desire to speak. The voices of the greatest chazonim sing through his sinuous melodic lines, spelled out in the loose declarative rhythms of Jewish pleas with the eternal. He is not as far away from us as he would prefer to place himself. His moody, exotic essays of national dances drifting easily into co-territorial Jewish habitations. Even these reckless, improbable fancies of mine get a response from Chopin. He charges contemporary Jewish music with a criminal offense of, quote, masquerading as Polish music to entice the masses. While writing what you are listening to now, the revelation that I think of Chopin, Chopin doesn't think of me, resounded in my head like a melodic crack of thunder. But I am unsure that this is true. Perhaps the composer said it best, quote, indeed, I write to you from a strange place. And yet, Chopin aside, perhaps I was not writing from such a strange place. In Yiddish art song, I could responsibly inhabit the lives of people who persisted through the fatal vagaries of a long 19th century. This, intentionally paired and informed by sounds and text from my own Yerusha, allowed me to explore the possibilities of work created in that uniquely diasporic culture space, a world comprised of these in-between worlds, or to put it more succinctly in Yiddish, a Welt mit Weltlech. This has developed into an ongoing project exploring musical and textual spaces where Black and Jewish expression are experienced simultaneously. Not for the purposes of easy conflation, but in order to summon a space of expressive and creative achdus, Einigkeit, of unity, something I've termed for myself as a Black Yiddishkeit. This exploration began with brief essays exchanging text and melody that could sustain a constant movement between languages and modes and histories in order to establish a singular, coherent mood. Don't nobody know my troubles but God. Of Churban besamechendosh. Don't nobody know my trouble but God. Und auf Goles Shechine. Don't nobody know my trouble but God. Oh Lord. Und auf Zores Israel, Israel, Israel. Working in the medium of the African American spiritual, a question that frequently arises from Jewish audiences concerns the reception of my work by Black audiences. It's hard to know what to make of this question. The performance and reception of music created under a state of enslavement is, understandably, immensely fraught for descendants of that state, a relationship very different than that of other people arriving from other states. Rarely is it acknowledged that this question about Black audiences is asked from a place of essential difference. It is easier to be nostalgic for Romania, 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 when one doesn't live in Romania any longer. It is easier to artfully ponder the life of a child in Cheder, when one no longer has to cross the muddiest road in the world in order to acquire a Jewish education. Us Black people in the United States still live in our old country, in the same land where atrocities were committed against us, are committed against us, where even now our Cossacks create policy, form their own unions, and move into positions of political influence and power over us. In a Beisoilem, in Volozhin, in Belarus, I turned my head away and my eye fell on something strange. A memorial monument in the shape of a sturdy tree trunk, made of stone, rooted in the ground, its once numerous branches lopped off, simultaneously a vegetable and a mineral. Cut down in its tender prime, it signified a youthful death, a youth outlasting many ages of youth. As I looked on it, I acknowledged that somehow I had eluded woodsmen long enough to stand there in Volozhin, in Belarus, beside that memorial tree of youth, and a painful gratefulness rained down over me onto that hallowed ground that history had sown so thickly with Jews. I have described my particular advent to Jewishness as an affinity, because sometimes I grow tired of telling stories about myself and wish people would let it go. Even the sturdy cardboard pages of children's books begin to buckle under the wear and tear of nightly story times. I'm afraid I'm made of much less sturdy stuff. Most of these affinities in my life have been improbable. They have adhered themselves to me with an ardor and a vehemence commensurate with their unlikeliness. There's little I can do to account for this. Explaining the perceived irregularities of my life is exhausting. The word affinity is going to have to suffice. For example, I have an affinity with a unicorn. Horned and white, this unicorn presents two features about equally beyond my reach. Incarcerated for no discernible reason, the unicorn eventually meets a graphically violent end, while the rest of the world calmly goes about its business, two fates perpetually within my reach. Its expression is remarkably insipid. The friendly, unsuspecting eye, the slight curl of contentment about its mouth, the face of a naif framed by the beauty of its confinement, a low pin in a field of flowers synchronized in bloom. This is the most iconic chapter of its life, a series of medieval tapestries at the Met Cloisters Museum in New York titled The Unicorn in Captivity. Closer inspection of the unicorn reveals what appear to be bloody wounds on various parts of its body. Scholars have posited that these wounds are seeds and nectar from the pomegranates hanging immediately above the unicorn, splitting open with ripeness. As a prelude to tragedy, I know they signify something else. I have an affinity with another unicorn on another wall. This unicorn is in a mural in a shul that no longer exists in Gwóździec, a corner of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, an entity that no longer exists. The unicorn in Gwóździec deals a death blow with its horn directly into the mouth of a rampant, ravening wolf, its eye steely with intent. This unicorn was eventually destroyed as well, along with the shul in Gwóździec and the greater part of Polish Jewry in the early 40s, as the rest of the world calmly went about its business. I once read that storytellers of the Akan people in West Africa begin their stories with a version of this statement. We do not really mean what we are about to say is true. A story, a story. Let it come, let it go. Somewhere between medieval tapestries and shul walls, temporary triumph and inevitable destruction, innocence and vigilance. An eye pointed directly towards the deadly foe. An eye rolled towards heaven in extremis. Between these affinities is a story I am reluctant to tell. Let it come, let it go. Vague miasmas of history hover around the spaces of American Jewish life, perhaps even more so than comparable arrivals to the American shore. Pervasive as they are elusive, they lie only just beyond the scope of what can be conveyed to a prospective convert to Judaism during regular meetings with a rabbi over the course of a year. Perhaps one would have to meet with a rabbi for 120 years. These indeterminate areas are nonetheless essential American Ashkenazi Jewish texts, at any given moment alluding to Shtetl, Cossacks, mass flight, steamship, steerage, Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island. They changed our name when we arrived. We changed our name when we arrived. He cut off his payas. She shunned her shadle. Dry goods, peddling, stickball, hardscrabble, enterprising. Entire European branches of our family were murdered over the course of 2 years. They spoke it so the children wouldn't understand. Socialist summer camp, communist cabins, Bundist bungalows, the suburbs, the sisterhood, the brotherhood, the otherhood. And that's the golf course from which we were excluded. Shuls, or rather synagogues. Synagogues, or rather temples. Temples, or rather chavaras. Lipton French onion soup mix. The rumba comes after the Israeli folk dance set. The Bible in brutalist stained glass. A Ner Tamid that looks like Sputnik. We stood taller after 67. A bar mitzvah is both a person and an occasion. The secret ingredient is Coke. Spiral-bound congregation cookbooks. Asphalt parking lots. Recipes both kosher and treif. And perhaps it was foolish of me to place my foot in the midst of this with the expectation that these turbulent waters would part on my account, poor wayfaring stranger that I was. What curious desert rocks these were, concealing cataracts of water underneath, forthcoming when spoken to, breaking forth when struck, these mysterious barricades of history, a pillar of column by day, a pillar of fire by night. In a shul in New York, a woman is expressing her surprise at my ability to approximate the sounds of chaf and chet. Conspiratorially, she discloses that only Jewish people can make these sounds. At this point, I am not yet Jewish, but not wanting to lose her sudden confidence, I decide to leave unaddressed the details of my chaf chet acquisition. In a shul in Nyack, an elderly man is reciting an Aliyah blessing in soft consonants and broad vowels. I mistake these for a series of errors, or the eccentricities of a regional accent. It is a regional accent, make no mistake, regions further away from Nyack than the ones that I can imagine. I am hearing something for the first time for which I do not yet have a word. A tom, a synesthetic phenomenon, something I can taste in my ear. In a shul in Miami, a woman is asking me from where I got my Yiddish accent. Poland, she declares, answering her own question. It is the exact accent of her departed father. I, myself, have no idea where my accent comes from. It comes from everywhere and nowhere. I've never met her father, and yet my accent is from him. It is certainly not from my father. Prior events have alienated me from him, that place where I am from. What she recognizes of her father in my accent is this: the sound of historic estrangement. In a shul on the Lower East Side, a man named Gedalia is interrupting a performance. He delivers an impromptu lecture on the concept of a Yiddish tam. I cannot tell if he is giving it directly to me, previously the performer, or to the rest of the people in shul, previously my audience. Standing at the bima, I wonder at what point for him I had gone astray. Was it as soon as I had opened my mouth? Gedalia asks me, "Have you ever heard of a Yiddish tam?" Later, I will concede that his interruption was more readily recognizable as having a Yiddish tam, that to him, interrupting me sounded more authentic. In a university courtyard in Ramat Aviv, a fellow student is inspecting my name tag. He declares that nobody in Israel has a name like Mordechai anymore. He had a commander in the army, Yedidia, but that was ages ago, when people in Israel still had names like that. A name like Mordechai, a name from a Purim spiel, a broad comedy set in another country, in another time, in another language, something you can watch on Israeli television in black and white, with subtitles in Hebrew. In a university courtyard in Los Angeles, a group of teenage girls from an Orthodox youth retreat is passing by on a late Friday afternoon. With uncharacteristic bonhomie, I call out to them, "Good Shabbos." They reply with one definitive word: "Thanks." In a hotel lobby in the West Midlands, a man is telling me that the experience of hearing Yiddish performed as classical music has struck him as bizarre. To be told what Yiddish sounds like in posh accents in a hotel in the West Midlands has struck me as bizarre. Later, I will regret letting this pass unremarked. On a road in Massachusetts, my husband and I are observing that almost every town name is from a place in England: Cambridge, Worcester, Gloucester, Plymouth. We dismissively chalk this up to the poverty of the colonial imagination. Then there are transliterations of older indigenous names: Chicopee, Nipmuc, Natick, Mashpee, and other transliterations: Salem. Every other American biblical superimposition, Zion, Shiloh, Rehoboth, Bethel, Canaan, Carmel, Goshen, and the biblical names they never touched because they literally couldn't wrap their prim mouths around them, names that will never know the banal violence of those flat northeastern accents. Pi hahirot, Baal Zephon, Be'er Lechai Roi. On a road in the Catskills, my husband and I are discussing the state of American Shul Hebrew. Some members of the congregation found a davener's Ashkenazi Hebrew to be humorous. I have never found Americans, or Shul, or Hebrew to be humorous. Americans ask themselves for the 1,000,000th time, what is it to be American? What is it to be an American Shul Hebrew, to only have one accent of Hebrew in Shul? I'm not saying anything like diaspora, love it or leave it, I declare. We laugh, but then I take it back, because that's exactly what I'm saying. Fellow exiles, if you're going to bother staying here, yucking it up in the pews at all those Audenois and Torresos, perhaps you could learn to love them, to love us. There's a town in Hungary called Nagykalo, which was called Kalev by the Jews who lived there. The rabbi of this town had a curious gift, the ability to recognize, in the wilds of the Jewish exile, those particular melodies which had once been sung by the priests in the temple in Jerusalem, melodies which had been lost when the temple was destroyed thousands of years before. Melodies, much like people, can become unmoored from their places of origin and set to wander over the face of the earth. So the rabbi roamed, listening to songs wherever he happened to encounter them, trying to find traces of mysterious, undeniably priestly origin. One day, he was wandering through the Hungarian countryside when he heard this. Solka kashmar, majd megvirt ma, zonder dolben, schick met zolben, scheidalej mandal, zonder dolben, schick met zolben, scheidalej mandal. Those words, sung in Hungarian, mean this. The rooster's calling already. It will be dawn soon. In a green forest, on the flat fields, a bird is walking. Now, here was a melody of undeniably holy origin, having floated all the way from the flames of the Temple of Jerusalem to the Hungarian countryside, where it was being sung by a shepherd who was watching his sheep in a field. The rabbi asked the shepherd to teach him the song. So they sat there in the field, the shepherd teaching the rabbi each phrase of the song until he had it just right. When the rabbi had learned the song completely, he thought it only fitting to pay the shepherd for his time and his effort. And as soon as he did this, the shepherd immediately forgot the song. Somehow, it had completely left the shepherd's mind, as if his sudden forgetfulness was a receipt of some kind of divine transaction. This fragrant Hasidic story is an arresting one, with implications in 1,000 different directions, some good and some not so good. This is my take, my chiddush. The future of the Jewish people is tied up in the lives, the cares, and I dare say the melodies of our neighbors, in whom these curious fragments of ourselves lie. It is our responsibility to walk over the face of our communities in search of opportunities to listen and to learn, amid past histories of destruction, to actively collaborate in building a more just and equitable future for us all. Oh, and also, should you decide to appropriate some element of another's culture, seek that other out, learn it properly, and then fairly compensate your teacher. This isn't some woke exhortation, Ziskite. It's literally right there in the story. Don't blame me, blame the Kalavar Rebbe. This is his story, not mine. I'm just some Yiddish singer from Fort Worth, Texas, a stranger in a strange land, wondering if something I created consisted too much of complaints. I'd been warned that an audience with the expectation of entertainment would not abide it for very long. Fortunately, my words were never for this concern in the first place, or the nebulous audience it had summoned for the purposes of dismissing me. After all, it was only ever the piquant complaint of generations, some 400 years, after which God took notice, responding with a mighty hand, an outstretched arm, great terror, signs, and wonders. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anthony and Dmitri. I haven't heard accordion in a long time, so it's been like really wonderful. I had a friend growing up in Russia who was an accordionist, so like she was present as a kind of a tamada, somebody who like leads the various festivities at all the kind of family events. So I always wanted to play an accordion, but never did. So it was really wonderful to hear that. And I wanted to maybe start with this last story from the Rabbi and the Shepherd, the Rabbi and the Shepherd, and kind of ask you, Anthony, but also Dmitri, to tell us about your teachers and kind of things that you learned from your teachers, and how do you sort of imagine these relationships that you've developed with people that you learned music from?
That's a really good question. Well, first, I would like to acknowledge a teacher who I have right here, which is Dmitri Gaskin. I've learned a lot about Jewish music making working with him. And I've been really lucky to have become entranced with types of music that possess people who are very passionate about passing that music on. I've been very lucky to have been involved with a Yiddish culture community, which has been extremely generous with giving me their knowledge, their artistry. Sometimes I feel very overwhelmed when I'm up there performing, because in my mind I can hear and feel all of the various teachers who I've interacted with kind of giving me what they've acquired throughout their lives. One person I would list right off the bat is a singer by the name of Ethel Reim. If you don't know this person, please look her up. Reim is R-A-I-M. She is a master singer of the unaccompanied Yiddish folk song. And what she does is she learns these songs and she guides singers through the act of learning these songs as well. And oftentimes they are from archival recordings of people who knew these songs their entire lives, people who learned them from other people in their own family, people who learned them from other people in their village. And basically what I do with her is go through the process of really listening to these recordings over and over and over again until I have a real sense of the meaning, but also the style. And that has affected my singing immensely. So that's one person I definitely think of. Oh, we also have worked with Josh Horowitz as a member of Varetsky Pass, an amazing klezmer trio in the San Francisco Bay Area, who that primarily play music from the Carpathians, Jewish music and also music of like kind of the co-territorial peoples of that area. And I've learned an immense amount from working with them, just from hearing their phrasing and their sound.
Yeah, I just want to say it's interesting what you were saying about working with Ethel Ray and listening to recordings and piecing them apart with her. You know, in a sense, those recordings are our teachers. And, you know, I think we can take that in one of two ways. It's either like super depressing, like there's nobody left, and so all we have left is really these recordings, and the so-called teachers, all they can do is work on recordings with us. Or, you know,
it's totally an oral tradition.
No,
though.
I'm getting to that.
Okay.
Or
I'm like, wait,
you know,
you're wrong.
Like, there's always interpretation, right? And none of our living teachers are going to interpret these songs the way that, you know, the way that the people that were recorded are interpreting them for whatever reasons, you know, not the least of which, obviously, it's impossible to play exactly what you hear. And everybody's putting their own spin and has their own background that they're bringing to it. And so I feel like what we can do is, and what I try to do is embrace that. And I try to play, you know, I've spent my time with the recordings and, you know, sit there repeating it over and over and over again and slowing it way down and trying to get every detail. But ultimately, what's more fun and more interesting is to play with people and play with, you know, my teachers, Josh Horowitz, Alan Byrne, who, you know, are living today and try and replicate their style and fuse them and bring in my own, you know, interpretation and try and continue that oral tradition of like letting it evolve. It's not a static thing that was recorded one time in 1913 and that's what it is. But we try and, you know, evolve it. I would not say even like a conscious, like, it's not even that we necessarily try to push it forward, but inevitably it happens because we're different musicians living in a different time with a different set of influences. And I'm trying to be open to that and letting it happen.
And sort of, as you were saying this, I was thinking about what I heard today, but also what I saw today, and the kind of research that might be required to create the kind of interpretation and your own musical expression of it, but also in your kind of in your words, Anthony, today too. But also today with film, right? So there's a question that is coming over Slido about film, the choices of film in today's program. But I wanted to kind of add to this also my own sense of, maybe incorrect, sense of your work as also being in some ways almost like ethnomusicological, that there's some archive that you approach that requires a sort of immense study. So there's a musical archive, but also a cinematic archive that you mine. So I'm just curious about the way that this all comes together.
I haven't checked myself, but in what I just read to you, the word expression had to come up at least 1,000 times. Because I'm very interested in expression, and I'm interested in expressive idioms, or idioms of expression. And I think there's a really interesting continuity between the expressive nature of Black people and Jewish people on early film and elements of Black culture and Jewish culture, even musically. I see cinematic parallels in the movement, in the faces that I choose to put in these films, parallels to what I'm trying to express in my music. It all feels like there's a continuity between those things. If anything, I'm depending on these images and these faces and these expressions to contextualize the words and sounds that I'm making, which is why I've kind of brought this giant collection of people into the room while I'm talking about this. You know, I can sit there and I can talk about the American Ashkenazi Jewish experience, or I can literally show you like 20 years of American Ashkenazi Jewish experience, and then try to pull out what that means to me and how that has affected my work. So I don't know if this is answering your question necessarily, but like I feel like there's a real continuity between these images and the expressive nature of black people and Jews on film, especially in film in the 1930s and maybe the 1940s, probably because it's closer in some way to both silent movie acting, but then theatrical acting as well. The acting still has elements of the theatrical about it, and I think that's what attracts me to it. Just off the top of my head, because I think somebody's going to ask, of course, there's the Dybbuk, is something that I use often. I love the images there, and I love the expressiveness, and also love the kind of, I like it as a text. I revisit it over and over and over again in different ways. There's an amazing film from exactly the same period called The Blood of Jesus. And that was an early black film that was allegorical in nature. So that's where the image of the man going up Jacob's ladder into heaven, that's from that. The image of the man, the black man sort of like sitting there and thinking, that's the image of the young woman like weeping in bed and then looking up to heaven. Those are all from that movie, The Blood of Jesus. There's another movie called Go Down Death, which is another early black cinematic film, which is also allegorical and kind of religious in nature. There's an amazing film in 1946 that was about immigration to the United States. So if you saw like images that were going by that looked sort of like diagrams of people moving from Europe into the United States or going back, it's from that 1946 film about immigration. Amazing stuff. And like,
Can I ask a question?
Can you ask a question?
Where was the black guy playing accordion from?
The black guy playing accordion was
Favorite
from
shot.
a 1930s film about employment in the black community during the Depression. And basically, I think it was put out by the American government saying, like, we're trying to make sure that there are, we know things are hard. We're trying to make sure that there are jobs in the black community. So I think there was a shot where it was showing people who were kind of lined up and the camera was kind of passing by. I mean, that was like a numerous shots. The weird thing is that like that thing of like having people lined up and then having the camera sort of graze their faces as they go by, it's a thing that's in Jewish film from the period, and it's a thing that's in black film from the period. And I think part of the reason why is because like these weren't just films that had black people in them or films that had Jewish people in them. They were literally films that were about black people and about Jewish people, about blackness and about Jewishness, which means that when the camera is looking at these people, it's not just looking at a bunch of characters, it's literally looking at blackness and Jewishness. It's this very unusual thing where, I mean, I just happened to find them in these two completely different films. There were these lines of people, and then like the camera would sort of like focus on their face as it went by.
I'm looking at the audience questions. There's a couple of questions about the Kunstlied, Kunstlieder, the art song. So there's an audience member who asked that I understand that Yiddish art song actually has a tradition of writing lyrics to classical tunes. That is Beethoven or Handel to raise up the masses. Please say more.
There is an element of that, but it's not something that I've ever performed. I do know that there are like alternate lyrics that have been written to these tunes, but in my experience, it usually was tunes that had a political import. Labor movement, yes, exactly. When I was talking about communist cabins and Bundist bungalows, would you have heard Handel coming out of a Bundist bungalow in Yiddish? You very well might have. I mean, that's the whole thing about the past. It's a completely different country. They do things very differently there. So I do know about that as a phenomenon, but it's not it's not something that I've really encountered. A lot of the art song material that I perform usually tends to be very Jewish in its melodic and musical background. Yeah.
Dmitri, for you, from an audience member, when did you first begin playing the accordion?
This is a great story.
Did you immediately take inspiration from these types of recordings, like the one from 1913?
I actually received my first accordion for my bar mitzvah. I had been playing piano. Well, there you go. I'd been playing piano since I was 4.
Wait, I just want to say, you don't get to clap unless you're willing to give an accordion to a bar bat mitzvah, okay? Because, like, you know,
Highly recommend it as a gift.
It's
very effective.
This culture is not going to support itself, okay? So get out there, get on eBay, buy that, give it, make it happen.
Let's see. I started playing. I started playing classical music. You know, at 4 years old. I was like good, but not good enough to be a classical musician. That's why I went to klezmer. Not at 4. It's bar mitzvah season, and the kids at the music school put together a band, and I wasn't actually good enough to be the pianist in that band. But when it was the pianist bar mitzvah, then I got to sub in, and I just kind of fell in love with that music, and it was a pretty short path from there to listening to these old recordings. By the way, the quality of the playing on those recordings is just awful. They're not like excellent musicians, but it's really the sort of style and the content that matters. But that's why it's not like outside of the music, the community that looks at this stuff. It's not like those recordings are super popular these days.
There's a question, the inevitable question that often I get asked as well, and you're asked as well by an audience member about the sort of death of Yiddish. The sort of the perception that Yiddish is about to die and vanish. So I'm curious, I guess, how you answer those questions when you do receive them. I mean, I have my own way of answering them, but
a good friend of mine by the name of Rachel Kafferson says that Yiddish is not dead, it's actually undead, it just smells a little funny. And I think there's a lot there. It doesn't make any sense to me, and I haven't, as I said in the Melodeklamatsiye, like, I haven't been here for very long, but for as long as I have been here, there have been entirely too many people, actually, like, speaking Yiddish and singing in Yiddish and creating things in Yiddish and plays in Yiddish, and, like, we have a queer punk band in Yiddish. It's just like, it's too much. It's too much. I can't begin.
Just in, Anthony Russell calls for less Yiddish.
No. Baruch Hashem. It should. I'm so happy that all these things exist. There's just so much of it. So when someone's like, "Is Yiddish dying?" I'm like, "No, there's like too much." It's like you can go to a Yiddish event every night of the week. I mean, there are people who are taking lessons, and there are people who whose creativity has sort of been unlocked by this language and this history, and like it's very different. This actually kind of hooks in with a little bit of my Ashkenormativity spiel. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of it. There's like a specificity to Yiddish language, Yiddish music, and Yiddish culture, which I think a lot of mainstream American Ashkenazi Jewish culture has generally papered over. Anything that was too foreign or too uncomfortable or too much of the old country, people pretty much just kind of packed up and put away. And what's really interesting is seeing how many people, young people, old people, everything in between, are now interested in unpacking the strangeness and the specificity of what Yiddish culture is. Because if people think mainstream American Ashkenazi Jewish culture, like, oh yes, let's do the latkes, blah, blah, blah. Yes, I mean, there are elements of that. I like to say American Ashkenazi Jewish culture is not necessarily Yiddish or not necessarily so Ashkenazi, it's just Ashkenazi flavored. That there's actually like specificities to aspects of Yiddish and Ashkenazi Jewish culture that previous generations have necessarily done away with. And that it's a little more complicated. I mean, what do we call an 8-branched candelabra that is lit during, December? What do we call it? A Hanukkah menorah, right? We don't call it a Hanukkah limpel, but that's probably what it would have been called by people who first came to this country who were Yiddish speakers. It wouldn't be called a Hanukkah either. Don't even start with that. So, like, I'm not expressing myself very well. I think I need to make a movie about this. Where you're staring at a bunch of people who are going, there are specificities to Yiddish and to Yiddish culture that American Ashkenazi Jewish culture does not really embody. And to say that those two things are the same thing, I think, does not make a whole lot of sense. That's all I have to say. So is it dead? No, because people are like digging it up constantly. It's like, I don't know, that image from the Dybbuk where the spirit of Chonin is walking through the graveyard and he's kind of like corporeal. He's kind of like has a body, but he's also a ghost at the same time. That.
How do queer idioms or expression of expression fit into your art? Thinking of that as another cosmopolitan communal identity.
This is really interesting. For me, it's like my expression of that is very personal, idiosyncratic. When I was an opera singer, I don't want to give away too much of what I want to talk about with Annegret tomorrow, but when I was an opera singer, there was a very strong, just get the word. People were like, "You're not singing masculine enough. Like you need to sing more masculine." Like there was an idea that like a bass was a very specific like set of things. A bass could be the soprano's father. A bass could be the villain. A bass could be the village fool. The bass could be God. But the bass was not supposed to have feelings. Not really. And this is the problem, is that like when I arrived to singing, I had so many feelings, and I still do. Like so many, I don't even know what to do with. I mean, I do know what to do with them. This is what I do with them, right? So, like, I would sing things, and people would literally tell me, like, stop singing like that. Like, you're not supposed to sing like that. You're singing like a soprano. And I'm like, well, maybe I have soprano feelings. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I want to sing in a way that makes me feel like I'm able to express the variety of feelings that I have, and I don't think that conventional classical music necessarily has a place for that always. Where it does have a place for it, I'd say more than anywhere else, is not in opera so much as art song. Because art song is necessarily poetic. The idea is that the singer is getting up and really sort of interpreting the poetry. So it's not a surprise that I ended up singing Yiddish art song, but in a way, Yiddish art song has very much been, I found a genre of music that allows me to have all the feelings that I need to have and actually rewards me for having those feelings, because I'm not just feeling for myself. I'm actually, in a way, creating a continuity of experience between what I'm experiencing as the performer and what other people are experiencing in the audience. It's this strange thing where I'm much closer to my audience singing in Yiddish than I think I've ever been singing before an audience, ever. Because on some level, I get things from the audience. It's like something that happens very often is that I will sing an unaccompanied Yiddish folk song thinking that only like 3 people in the world know this song. Like me, Ethel Rame, who taught it to me, and the young woman who came over to the United States from a village in Ukraine in like 1925 by herself. We are the only three people who know this song. And invariably, there'll be somebody in the audience who's like, I know that song. My grandmother used to sing that song to me. You're saying like, oh, it's not, it is, it's nice, but it's also like, it's immensely meaningful to me. Like, it gives me a reason to live, because like, it's such a special thing to be able to have these elements of people's personal histories and to discover what those connections are by performing that in front of an audience. Like, who could ask for anything more?
I hate to be that guy, but if you want to hear how that works in performance, we'll be back on Thursday.
Well,
Please be that guy.
Yeah, I mean, there are more questions, but I don't think that there's a way to top off that way, but what you said as a kind of the presence of you with the audience and getting something back from the audience when you sing Yiddish. Maybe think about something that you said in your presentation, in your Melodeklamatsiye, about the meaning of this text to me. I'm paraphrasing you. Mm-hmm. The meanings of this text to me as a Jew, to me and not to you, right? That that was really just sort of very striking, the way that you place yourself there as an artist who can make the interpretations, who is required to make an interpretation that is yours, but it's at the same time sort of wonderful to hear you get us kind of say that also it's kind of you do receive something back from the audience.
I don't always plan for it to be that
Yeah.
way. Like, I'm getting up there and I'm just kind of doing my thing. I mean, I think this is like very confusing for a lot of people, but like when I get up and I perform a Yiddish art song about a depressed yeshiva bocher who's wondering what to do with his life, I'm performing it as a queer black man who also is kind of wondering what to do with his life. I'm performing it literally as myself. I don't think it really works for me to be like, okay, now I am a young yeshiva bocher in a village long ago. I am looking out of the window and it is raining. Oh, I am so miserable. Here we go. Like, I don't think it doesn't work for me actually as a performer to try to do that. I sing these songs as myself, which makes it a little complicated because it means that I only sing songs that I really feel some kind of connection to, which means that there's a lot of songs that I don't sing, that I don't feel a connection to. I have never performed Oifen Pripachik. Part of the reason why is that I think there are a million other interpretations of it that could do so much a better job than I could. Like, why would I try to do that? In Yiddish art song, I actually have the ability to find a repertoire for myself that is relatively unknown or little performed, and I can sort of pour myself into that without having necessarily to stack up to every single version. I've never sung Romania. I mean, that makes people don't know what to do with that. They're like, do you really sing in Yiddish? And then I have to be like, well, yes. And they're like, sing something. And I'm like, well, but you don't know what it is. And they're like, okay, well, fine.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I wanted to ask you just to give us a sense of if you could, there is another event with you on Thursday at 7 p.m. At Walker Ames, which is where the reception will be tonight. But the event on Thursday is there. If you could give us a sort of a preview.
So I'd say this Melodeklamatsiye, in a sense, what I did tonight, in a sense, was a little bit of like me defending a dissertation. So if you want to hear the dissertation, come on Thursday. You will get the entire. Yeah, it will be there in full effect. You will hear it fully realized. It's in two sections. The first section is called Children of the Ghetto. This is named after a 1903, I think it is, novel by an English Jewish writer by the name of Israel Zangwill. Or maybe it was in the I think it was like in the 1890s that he wrote it. I think in the 1900s, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote The Souls of Black Folk. We have these two books which are specifically about the state of the lives of their respective peoples, that being Black people and Jewish people. So I was inspired by these two books to sort of create a collection of pieces that sort of live in the space that these two books sort of inhabit. It will be a little less wordy and a lot more singy. So if you want to hear more singing, come on Thursday.
All right. Thank you so much, Anthony and Dmitri.
Thank you.
Thank you to the audience for coming, and please join us for the reception across the way at Walker Ames.